The East Blue arc is the first major arc of One Piece in which Luffy and his crew start their legendary journey. In this video, we will be looking at the entirety of the East Blue arc and breaking it down and discussing its overall value and influence. The East Blue arc is a story about how Luffy left his hometown to become a pirate and subsequently started a pirate crew known as the Straw Hat Pirates, and then made his way to the Grand Line. The East Blue arc is also made up of many other minor arcs. Those arcs include Romance Dawn, Orangetown, Syrup Village, Baratie, Arlong Park, Loguetown, and to a lesser extent the Buggy arc, which is called the Buggy's Crew Adventure Chronicles, and the Warship Island arc, which is filler. Each of these arcs presented something really interesting about Luffy, the Straw Hats, and how they came together. In these minor arcs, we see Luffy essentially gaining crew members within each arc. He faces a lot of minor villains who he defeats single-handedly for the most part, and we're introduced to some major players in the One Piece series that have yet to unravel their full histories and mysteries. As he creates his crew, we see Luffy recruit Zoro, the pirate hunter, in the Romance Dawn arc, Usopp in the Syrup Village arc, Nami in the Arlong Park arc, although she was introduced a lot earlier and became a character in the Orangetown arc, and Sanji, who was introduced in the Baratie arc. The arcs themselves were very compelling as stories. These weren't just side quests that the main character Luffy went on in order to collect his crewmates. These were actual stories that had stakes and had very interesting characters and had a lot of emotional appeal as well. Zoro's arc is the story of a character who was lost and found his home with Luffy, someone who can help him achieve his victory and the status that he wants within the world as the most powerful swordsman. His arc actually begins in the Romance Dawn arc and kind of comes full circle in the Baratie arc, so he doesn't have his own specific set of consecutive episodes that are focused on him, but this works very well for his character. Usopp has the Syrup Village arc, which is about him facing his own desire to become a legendary warrior of the sea one day, all while saving his town from a devious pirate in disguise. Sanji's arc is the Baratie series of episodes, which is about a cook who is extremely talented and tough, but has set aside his dreams for the father figure in his life to support him and because he feels indebted to him because of the love and care that he gave to him. Nami's arc is the story of a girl who is captive and controlled by a tyrannical pirate crew that is terrorizing her home in the Arlong Park arc. One thing I really liked about the way that they set up these stories and actually collected the members of the Straw Hat crew is that it's a lot more interesting than the way that other shows may have or would have introduced characters to join his team. None of his crewmates actually wanted to be pirates except for Usopp. This wasn't a team of people who just happened to bump into each other, who had shared values and shared ideas. Luffy had to convince all of his crewmates. He had to make them believe that their dreams could come true through uniting with him. He was very successful in this. The one thing that we really don't see in this arc very well is a full character arc for Luffy himself. We don't really see very much about Luffy's past. We don't really understand too much about who he is as a character. He's supposed to, in this arc in particular, represent an everyman. He is best represented by his values and his instincts and his conviction and how hard he's going to work in order to get what he wants and become who he wants to be. So although this is something that's missing from the story and could be looked at as a negative for this arc, it does work very well for Luffy as a character. Otherwise, this introduction to the One Piece world is largely successful. It is full of intriguing stories and has a lot of interesting characters. And when the characters join the Straw Hat crew eventually, you feel like each of them has earned their place on the crew. It wasn't something that they just received on a whim from Luffy. Luffy, of course, wanted all of these members on his crew, but their path to accepting that offer was very arduous and challenging for all of them. None of them thought or wanted to believe in Luffy as a captain or thought that his offer was a reasonable or plausible avenue. He convinced them not just by showing how strong he was, but how hard he would work for them to reach their goals, as well as his own to become King of the Pirates. Another thing that is really great about the set of episodes, this entire East Blue arc, is the fact that when we come out of it, we're at a very interesting place in the entire One Piece series. At the end of the East Blue arc, the audience essentially knows only a couple things about who Luffy is and what the story is about. We know that Luffy is a pirate and he has started a pirate crew called the Straw Hats. We know that he isn't an evil pirate, but a quote good pirate. And we also know that they're on their way to the Grand Line so that they can find the One Piece, the thing that will allow Luffy to become the King of the Pirates. And we know that everyone else's dream is achievable on that path. That's all we really know about this story. That is the most basic premise, but one of the things that is very powerful and promising about the stories is that we know very, very little about what that actually means. This is the most basic premise of the show, but one thing that is very powerful and promising about where we are in the story is that we do know very, very little about what that actually means. The One Piece could be a treasure box with the most extraordinary gold that the world has ever seen. The One Piece could be a devil fruit that beats every other devil fruit that there's ever been. But we don't know what it is. We don't know how hard Luffy will have to fight in order to get it. Or if the One Piece is just something he can find in a cave and that he wouldn't have to work hard to get in the first place. That's what's so intriguing about the One Piece story, is that there is a lot of mystery. Despite how much content there is in this arc, there's over 50 episodes, the audience really doesn't know half of what One Piece is or will eventually be, particularly considering where the manga and the anime is now. There are so many factions that haven't introduced themselves, so many entities that have not revealed themselves, and so many mysteries that have not been solved or even introduced to the story. All we know is a very small story, which is the story of this crew of really just 5 members and how they came together. Moreover, that's the very thing that makes One Piece so very interesting in the first place. When you look at One Piece, and after watching over 1,000 episodes of this series, when you think about it in retrospect, we started off with the most simple of stories, with stakes that were high for individuals, but were only about small towns, only about small islands, and only about 5 crewmates. Hundreds of episodes later, we're involving entities like governments, secret societies, ancient secrets that are unknown to the entire world, that have stakes on a global scale. And that is what makes the East Blue arc so pivotal and so important and so groundbreaking. In fact, it makes it that much more interesting and effective when you look at it in retrospect. The most recent anime episodes are very high impact, very dense. A lot of battles are happening with a lot of lights and flashy moves, and with a lot of extraordinary plot points and interactions between characters that you couldn't even fathom when you were at the beginning of the East Blue arc. And when you look at how different the art style is for those first 60 episodes, it comes off as a nostalgic memory. Especially with the watercolors and the painting of the backgrounds, and the way that the story is paced kind of feels very nostalgic, and it paints a very interesting contrast between where the One Piece story was and where the story is now. So the East Blue arc is certainly nothing anyone should be skipping as far as its impact to the story. It creates such memorable stories that are of the most impactful in the entire series, and it also provides the audience with such a fresh look and start when viewing the world of One Piece. They could have introduced One Piece with the highest stakes as possible, but Oda decided to start with a very humble story about a boy who breaks out of a small barrel on a pirate ship. And that subtlety, that contrast, is what makes this an excellent arc.